Okay. My name is Weixiao Tang. I am an undergraduate student at King's College London in the Department of Culture, Media, and Creative Industries. And today I would like to present my research on the portraits of intimate partner violence in Chinese news reports. Okay, let's begin with the background. Based on the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization's definition, intimate partner violence is a common but hidden public health problem, including physical, sexual, mental, and other forms of harm inflicted by a current or former partner. As we can see in the slide, contemporary IPV research often include 4 directions. In the second research direction, which is the different media framing's influence on the public perceptions of IPV, many studies have proved that media discourse has a profound influence on public perceptions, since it is a potential source of public opinion that can provide a consistent social acceptance. And media framing plays an important role in this process. Episodic frames and thematic frames are 2 essential types of news reporting. Episodic framing usually describes the issue in terms of specific events on the individual, while thematic framing tends to take the forms of in-depth background focus on social roles, as well as the individual. Previous studies have shown that in the coverage of violence themes, the frequency of episodic frames tends to be much higher than that of thematic frames. However, it should be noticed that almost all of those studies on the use of media frames in IPV were carried out in the Western context. Although the issue of IPV has gradually attracted attention in China in the past 2 decades, few studies have evaluated the relationship between the media and such violence. We also found that studies on how Chinese media report the IPV issue and shape the social cognition of IPV are seldom done, and there are even fewer researchers on the vertical comparison of the use of frames in Chinese IPV reporting. At the same time, the vertical study on texture features in Chinese IPV reports is also an almost blanket field. In order to fill in these gaps, the following research questions were raised. The type of primary frames employed by Chinese news reports, whether it was consistent with previous research results of other countries indicating more episodic than thematic framing, and whether the situation has changed significantly between 2010 and 2020 were of interest in question 1. The first question also asked what are the predominant news frames for thematic coverage and how they changed between 2010 and 2020. Research question 2 mainly considers noteworthy contextual characteristics of the IPV incidents reported, as well as the transformation of these contextual features from 2010 to 2020. To make the significance more clear, the research has the potential to fill research gaps mentioned before, such as the lack of vertical research on media framing's influence on IPV in the non-Western context. On this basis, it also takes meaningful contextual features specifically related to Chinese culture and customs, such as conflicts between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law and the faith issue into account. To explain it a little bit more in Chinese, faith refers to a sociological concept in general linked to the dignity and prestige that a person has in terms of their social relationships. Now let's talk about the methodology. For data collection, there are two main data sources in this study. They are Factiva, the global news monitoring and search databases, and Weixiao, the media database mainly containing news from mainland China. Depending on the researched questions, we use the keyword of domestic violence in searching the news both in the years of 2010 and 2020. This procedure yielded a total of 1,908 news stories from 2010 and 658 news from 2020. Then we screened 589 Chinese news reports related to IPV issues and the events specifically as the search sample in 2010. In the same way, the study finally got 199 news reports in the Chinese mainland that mentioned IPV as a sample from 2020. This study contains 788 news articles in total. To figure out how the portraits of IPV in Chinese media coverage have changed over the last 10 years, different coding units were used. All the articles were coded for their newspaper category, day and date of publishing, and placement of reports. Other variables coded were primary news framing, including episodic and thematic framing, the specific type of thematic framing, like government responses to IPV and public health perspectives, and contextual features, such as types of IPV, personal history information about the perpetrator and victim, and the outcomes of the incident. Okay, it's time to talk about the results. Research question 1 is interested in median frames adopted in Chinese IPV news reports. As shown in table 1, the results of Chinese news coverage in 2010 were consistent with previous research. That is, news reports using episodic frames are dominant. To be more specific, episodic frame was used in 63.3% of IPV reports, while 36.7% of coverage adopted thematic framing. However, results of Chinese news reports in 2020 show that much more thematic framing has already been used than episodic framing. The percentage of episodic coverage decreased significantly from 63.3% in 2010 to 15.1% in 2020. While the proportion of thematic coverage increased from 36.7% in 2010 to 84.9% in 2020. Next, as table 2 shows, of all articles in 2010 using thematic framing, the most commonly used news frame is the thematic frame involved in public health perspective and government responses. In 2020, although the two most common thematic frames are still frames address the government responses to IPV and public perspective, the percentage of thematic coverage that includes government responses to IPV significantly increased from 57.4% to 74.6%, and that of public perspective decreased from 84.7% to 74%. Research question 2 was interested in the contextual features of the incidents reported. As Table 3 presents, it is notable that physical violence was overwhelmingly dominant in all types of IPV involved in news reports in both 2010 and 2020. Almost all of the incidents reported, which is 98.5% in 2010 and 100 in 2020, include physical violence. On the contrary, few IPV incidents involving economic or sexual violence were reported. In addition, money, alcohol use, and anger were portrayed as relatively common causes of IPV events. In terms of IPV incidents consequences, most the victims, which are 85.5% in 2010 and 76.8% in 2020, survived but suffered physical injuries. According to Table 4, it is worth noting that no IPV incidents of same-sex couples were reported in both 2010 and 2020. The victims in the reports were mainly women, while the perpetrators were mainly men. In both 2010 and 2020, the most frequently mentioned personal history information of perpetrator is also violent behavior and alcoholism, which were both mentioned in 5.1% of the stories. Finally, whether in 2010 and 2020, little personal history information on victims was provided in IPV reports. The next section is discussion and conclusion. The research found that consistent with the research results of other countries and regions, China's IPV news report in 2010 used more episodic frames rather than thematic frames. The percentage of IPV coverage using thematic frames, however, has well surpassed the percentage utilizing episodic frames by 2020. Under the influence of this newspaper adapting thematic framing, individuals tend to assign the responsibility of IPV to the whole society, then giving impotence to the society to provide a variety of protection services, reform laws, policies, etc., eventually reducing the rates of IPV incidents. Furthermore, in terms of contextual aspects, the research findings from Chinese IPV reports from 2010 and 2020 share a lot in common. One of the most notable features reflected in Chinese IPV coverage is that incidents involved in the physical violence are extremely dominant in all reported incidents. The tendency to selectively report physical violence incidents can consolidate the view that physical violence is the only IPV type worthy of attention, and the importance of other IPV types, such as economic and sexual violence, are largely ignored. Even though they also have a great negative impact on public health. Additionally, there are also significant difference between the findings of Chinese IPV coverage studies between 2010 and 2020. Positive changes are being made to address the IPV problem. For example, in terms of IPV types, the proportion of incidents involving verbal violence and emotional violence that used to be relatively ignored has increased. As previously analyzed, the trend in IPV news coverage may provide public cognition of other IPV forms beyond the physical dimension to protect the rights and safety of relevant victims to a greater extent. However, there are several developments in IPV news reporting over the past 10 years that will provide effective social action on the subject. For instance, the proportion of perpetrators' violence history being reported decreased. IPV perpetrators as a group may be different from non-IPV perpetrators on certain life history characteristics. The media's attention to the perpetrator's personal history information may provide a warning to potential victims of IPV and play a preventive role in this social issue. The downward trend of mentioning the violent history of the perpetrator will lead to the increasing inability of the media to exercise this function of preventing IPV events. Finally, I'll briefly introduce the limitations and recommendations of this research. This study has several limitations. There were IPV incidents of great influence across the country in both 2010 and 2020, such as the Dong Shanshan case in 2010 and the Fang Moyang case in 2020. The repeated reports of these events with specific characteristics may lead to the deviation of the samples to impact research results. In addition, between 2010 and 2020, there was a dramatic transition from print to digital media in Chinese journalism. Nevertheless, digital news was not included in these samples, in the samples of this research. The lack of digital news may lead to incomplete samples, which probably affects the results. To more comprehensively investigate the portraits of IPV by Chinese news reports in recent years, it is necessary to further study IPV news in digital medium platforms. And here is my reference list. This is the end of the presentation. Thanks for listening. I would really appreciate if anyone could give me some precious feedback and maybe suggestions. Thank you.